In this article, I want to scroll down a little bit here. And you talk about, you can kind of elaborate on this real quick, and then I want to talk about your planning process. But you talk about the timeline for wide-scale SHTF situations. And basically, it's that rule we've all heard, right? 90% of people are going to die off. And you break it down into kind of the time frame, right? Of how long, or the possibilities. I mean, it's not a tried and it's not a perfect timeline, but it's the possibilities or the likelihood.
Yeah, it's more of the example of like, this is if given the 90% rule. And I haven't found, I was digging the other day for it, and I haven't found where there was in fact anyone that ever said there was 90%. Now I've referred to it myself about it came out in a report for Congress, but where I've traced it back to was some congressmen used 1 second after they talk about in there 90% of the population would die if the grid went down, kind of stuff, I believe is where they mentioned it. So they referred to 1 second after and they quoted that. So that's where the 90% so far where I can see it comes from, but it makes sense, right? When I reversed engineered the 90%, when you go back to the population of like, say the United States back in 1900, it was like around 50 million, right? That's a little bit, that's more than 90%. But or that's more than 10% of the population, but not much more. It's about 15% of the population. It's 330 some odd million people in the United States. So if we look around 50 million people, it's about 15 to 20%. Well, thinking that society back in 1900, that was probably the max population that society could support with the resources they had available, the technology they had available. So if you had something where the grid was down and technology like was pretty much used, especially when you consider the cities, right? And so the way I looked at it was I took that 90% number and I kind of just jockeyed around with it to where in the first week you have those people that die that are alive because they're dependent upon the system, right? So if the grid goes down, you have people that are on life support, different things like that you would lose a certain number of people. And then once you get into about a week of it, someday after 3 days, 4 days a week where there's, nothing's happening in the cities, the grid's down, people are out behaving like we believe they will behave, right? Because I mean, law enforcement can't get around, the society collapses. What happens? Those places are gonna get really violent really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you run into people who die from the violence, and then you run into people who eventually die from lack of resources because there's not any resources going into those places. And that's when you'll also see that exodus where people, you'll either have to flee or you'll have to hunker down, right? And hunkering down with the thought that I'm going to be able to stay in this one place long enough to outlive society completely falling apart and everything that happens. So that's the first week, right? And then once you move into like the second, week 2 through like week 3, I think you're going to lose a lot of people in those next 3 weeks because of the cities, right? When you look at the population of cities, I don't remember what I had in the article, but I want to say it's like 250 million people live in urban areas. Okay, well, you're going to, if violence goes nuts because the grid is down and everybody's losing their minds, you may lose a large chunk of those people. And you're going to have people that push out into the countryside. So over time, you're gradually going to see the level of violence and stuff. I think the people out that are more rural are more, they get along a little bit better. They're more self-reliant. So I think you'd see that transitioning less, the violence to them later on. And eventually the fact, we're going to have to live on the resources, and we have if the grid's down, the world's worst EMP event that could happens, everything's down for whatever.
Yeah.
Assuming that, then I think you end up with a population in the U.S. somewhere between like probably 30 to 50 million people.
I think that 28 days you're talking about, that first month or so, I think that is also probably the most dangerous when you talk about because if it's going on that long, it's something that is probably going to be that large scale. So I think that's the time where everybody'd want to just hunker down, not pay attention to, stay away from everybody, all of that stuff. You're also thinking in that time period, people with medical issues are going to be part of that whole die-off. People with conditions that just aren't going to be helped, that they're basically being helped these days because of the advancements in medicine and all that stuff. So, yeah, that to me is I think the scariest part, I suppose. I mean, it's all going to suck if something like this happens, but that to me is the oh crap, here we go type aspect of it. Then you've got 90 days and then 365 days. Kind of go over those real quick, and then we'll go over your plan.
Yeah. So on the 90 days to 365 days, this is where I think like you really get that transition from to where it's more kind of, you have the people that made it through the first 3 months. So they had some sort of resources, some sort of wherewithal, cunning, whatever, to make it through that. But now you're into the part where society settles itself out. It's like, are you able to find or procure the resources, And at that point, if society's completely collapsed, unless you hit a warehouse full of MRE somewhere, you're having to grow your own resources. We talked about it a few shows ago where we mentioned, how it was in San Francisco, like when the earthquake happened, they had all the cattle. The cattle were right there. They were just out. They had the stockyards right there, just outside of the city, because when you don't have refrigeration, you need the cattle have to be close to where you're going to eat it.
Yeah.
So I think you run into all of those things where it just gradually resettles down to a society that is self-reliant, that can grow its own food and figures that out. And so I think that's what that 90 to 365 day period is.
Yeah. That is, to me, and when I think about this stuff, it's kind of like you made it through the hardest part, but it's not time to just rest on your laurels. You still got to have your attention up and be paying attention to stuff, because it's still going to be without rule of law and stuff like that, most likely. Things will eventually start to get put back together and all of that stuff. But I think that's also why it's important to have the skills and learn how to do all this stuff after your food storage runs out and stuff like that. So you can have your year's worth of food storage, 2 years worth of food storage, whatever it is, but you're going to have to be working on the ability to replenish those, or crossing your fingers that society starts to get put back together and those things happen. Again, this is one of those very unlikely long situations, just a complete collapse of society. Very unlikely, because there's too many people in power that want to maintain their power, and they're going to do everything in their power to make sure this type of situation doesn't happen. So, but I agree with it. It's definitely, that's how it would look. I mean, if something were that big and something were to go down like that.
Hey everyone, thanks again for watching.
Absolutely. Just as a reminder, you can help us defeat the censors by liking, subscribing, and sharing this or any of our videos. Don't forget to click the link below and visit the website. Over there, you can listen to any of the older podcast episodes and also get on the email list.
And best of all, you can help us give the finger to both the apocalypse and the censors alike.